Welcome to the Law Firm Practice Management Advice Podcast.
The fundamentals of business.
Join Kirk Stange of Stange Law Firm as he discusses helpful strategies, tools, and insights to grow and manage a legal practice.
Good ideas are simple.
From improving client relationships to managing your team and scaling your practice, this podcast offers practical advice for navigating the challenges of law firm management.
Shall we proceed?
Now, here's your host, Kirk Stange.
Welcome to Law Firm Practice Management Advice. We have an interesting topic today. The topic is considering a 2 weeks notice. This episode today is based on an article on my blog, Law Firm Practice Management Advice, and the title of the article is, Do You Take a 2 weeks Notice? The date of the article is April 2nd, 2017, so as a follow-up to the episode today, go on over to Law Firm Practice Management Advice and read this article on this topic for more information. But let's go ahead and jump on into the topic at hand. If you own or operate a law firm, the reality is from time to time, employees are going to depart. It's just going to happen. People move on. They take another job. They're going elsewhere. Look, sometimes you're going to get the courtesy of a 2 weeks notice. The employee will come to you. They will say, here's my 2 weeks notice. And they'll give you some information on where they're going to work and what their reasons are or whatnot. Look, sometimes you're not going to get a 2 weeks notice at all. Some employees will resign and their resignation will be imminent. All right? So the question is, if you're lucky to get a 2 weeks notice, and truthfully, not every employee is going to leave a 2 weeks notice, but if you get it, the question is, do you take that 2 weeks notice? Do you not take the 2 weeks notice and send the employee on their way and wish them the best? That's the question that we have in this episode here today. And candidly, lots of law firms can sort of gravitate in one or two ways, right? Some law firms will just take the 2 weeks notice. They'll take it each and every time. And that's just kind of what they do in most circumstances. And look, other law firms might gravitate toward not taking the 2 weeks notice. If an employee puts in their resignation, gives their 2 weeks notice, lots of law firms will just send the employee on their way. And so the question is, what's the right approach? Do you take the 2 weeks notice? Do you not take the 2 weeks notice? That's really the topic at hand in this podcast. And the thing I would tell the listeners is this, is from my vantage point, there is no right or wrong answer. The truth is every situation is different, and what law firms ought to do is sometimes take the 2 weeks notice and sometimes not take the 2 weeks notice. But to me, this comes down to some factors that, for me, I've always weighed in terms of making this decision. And I think for most law firms, they'd be wise to either use a list like this or come up with their own list and weigh the pros and cons of taking a 2 weeks notice. It's not simple. It's not easy. It's not something any law firm should do in a robotic sense. So let me give you some factors that law firms might want to consider when deciding whether or not to take a 2 weeks notice, all right? The first one is, how long has the employee worked for the firm? From my vantage point, the longer the law firm employee has been at the firm, they've proven themselves to be a person of high character, then the more apt you would be to take the 2 weeks notice. On the other hand, if the employee is relatively new at the firm, they haven't really shown you a lot, you don't think that highly of them in the first place, then from my vantage point, the less likely you should be to take that 2 weeks notice, all right? So that's factor one. Factor two, which is worthy of looking at, is where is the employee going to work? All right. Sometimes they won't even tell you. And if they won't tell you, this is problematic. But if the employee tells you where they're going to work and why they are going there, then the question is are they going to a direct competitor? If they're going to a direct competitor, from my vantage point, the less likely it should be that you take the 2 weeks notice. On the other hand, if they're going to work for somebody else in a different area of the law, it's not a competitor, then from my vantage point, the more likely you would be to take the 2 weeks notice. All right. Factor three is what work items are on this employee's agenda. Okay. So if there are pressing matters on the employee's agenda, they could finish it up before departing in the 2 weeks notice, and maybe they would be best situated to finish these items up because they were the ones working on it, then the more likely you would be to keep the employee. On the other hand, if the employee doesn't really have any pressing matters on their agenda anyway, or other employees in the firm could similarly get whatever it is done and they could do it, really with equal speed and equal diligence, and then really the less likely you would be to take their 2 weeks notice. All right. So for lawyers, you're going to be looking to it, court dates and cases. And is there something imminently on the calendar that this lawyer has unique knowledge on and can handle? And if that's the case, then the more likely you would be to take the 2 weeks notice. But if their docket and calendar is pretty clear to begin with, then there probably isn't a reason to take a 2 weeks notice. All right. Factor 4 is how has the employee announced their departure. All right. If they've come to your law firm in a classy and a dignified way, and they're telling you, hey, I got this job opportunity, it was just too good to refuse, but I love my time at the firm and thank you for everything you've done, then from my vantage point, the more likely you would be to take the 2 weeks notice. On the other hand, if it's not a classy departure and the employee's got a bunch of grievances and maybe they're airing these grievances in an unpleasant way, then from my vantage point, look, if they're not happy being at the workplace or at the law firm, then the more likely you would be just to send them on their way. Look, if you're not happy, then look, we're sorry to hear that, but go ahead and depart, and you can start early at your new job opportunity. All right. Factor 5 is what effect would it have on others if you took the notice, okay? Sometimes if you take a 2 weeks notice, other employees are going to be really happy about it. They can say goodbye to the employee. They can thank that employee for their service. Maybe you could even have a going away party for the employee, have somebody bring in a cake or cookies, and you could have a little party and you send them on their way, and it's a morale boost to everybody. Then from my vantage point, the more likely you would be to take the 2 weeks notice. On the other hand, if the other employees didn't even really like this employee to begin with, and there wouldn't be this sort of party and this send-off, and it's not going to raise morale to keep the employee around, sometimes it might deflate morale to keep the employee around because, again, the other employees didn't even really appreciate this employee that much, then from my vantage point, the less likely you would be to take the 2 weeks notice. All right. Question 6 is how hard will this employee work over their final 2 weeks? Okay, if this was somebody who worked really hard while they were at the firm, they gave their job duties their full attention, they were passionate, right? They worked really hard, they're really competent, really diligent on their cases or whatever it is they're working on at the firm, then the more likely you would be to take the 2 weeks notice. On the other hand, if this is an employee that you had real questions about in terms of their work ethic and the work quality while they were working at the firm and before their resignation, then from my vantage point, the less likely you would be to take the 2 weeks notice, because in having seen this over the course of time, the reality is a lot of employees over the course of their final 2 weeks, if they weren't a good employee before, their work quality and their speed might drop off even more because they're checked out, right? They've already resigned. They're getting ready for their new job. And so if you're dealing with that kind of employee, then the more likely you would be just to send them on their way. All right, factor 7, will the employee say good things about the law firm over their final 2 weeks? Okay, so if this is an employee who's been a good employee and they're going to say positive and good things about the firm over their final 2 weeks, and they just got a job opportunity they couldn't refuse, right? Maybe it's their dream job. Maybe they don't want to do your area of law anymore. They want to step into something different, but they're going to speak highly about the firm over the final 2 weeks. Then I think the more likely you would be to take the 2 weeks, okay? Conversely, if the employee is groveling and they're negative and they're unhappy over their final 2 weeks, then practically you might be better just to take their notice effective immediately and send them on their way, because you don't want the negativity and the groveling to spread throughout the workplace any further. All right? And then factor 8 is this, which is the employee taking a job that's truly a step up for them? Okay, this is somewhat subjective. So you have to put yourself in the eyes of the employee. Okay, but if the employee's got a different job opportunity in the employee's mind, this job opportunity is a step up in some way. Okay, maybe they're getting paid a lot more. Maybe they're moving into an area of the law that they like a little bit better. Maybe there's some, dream they've had in terms of their career, and this job is kind of plopped in their lap, and it's just something for this employee that's perfect. Then from my vantage point, the more likely you would be to take the 2 weeks notice, right? Because this employee isn't unhappy with the firm. Okay, they just got a job opportunity that was too good for them to pass up. All right. But on the other hand, if the employee is moving somewhere laterally, right? So it's another firm in the same practice area. Maybe the job even looks like a step down. Like maybe it's a pay decrease. something like this, then from my vantage point, even if they're not, visibly unhappy, they're not vocalizing unhappiness. If an employee's taking a job that's a step down, from my vantage point, you just have to be a little bit curious that maybe they've got some sort of grievance that they just haven't aired that they're keeping to themselves. And in this circumstance, I would be more likely to send an employee on their way then, all right? Take a situation with the employee, and I've seen this, where they won't even tell you where they're going. To me, that automatically weighs heavily against taking a 2 weeks notice. If they won't tell you where they're going even, then why would you keep them the final 2 weeks? Why would you trust them with cases and clients and confidential proprietary information if they don't even trust you enough to tell you where they're going, all right? So look, these are 8 factors that I think are important for any law firm to look at in deciding whether or not to take a 2 weeks notice or not. I think a lot of law firms could look at these factors. They could come up with their own factors, but from my vantage point, there isn't really a cut and dry rule. There isn't a right and wrong. Law firms shouldn't automatically take a 2 weeks notice every single time. On the other end of the spectrum, a law firm shouldn't just say no to a 2 weeks notice every time. If in weighing these factors weigh in favor of taking the 2 weeks notice, then a law firm ought to do it. And so, look, case by case, circumstance by circumstance, take the facts of each individual situation and make an informed decision about whether to take the 2 weeks notice or not. And I think if law firms do this, then they're going to be doing this in a way that ultimately takes the facts, the circumstances in mind, and a law firm is going to be able to make the best possible decision. All right, so that's the topic today. Whether to take a 2 weeks notice is a follow-up to the episode today. Go on over to lawfirmpracticemanagementadvice.com. Read the article titled, Do You Take a 2 Weeks Notice? The date of the article is April 2nd, 2017. This will give you more information on this topic, but thanks for tuning in today. Stay tuned to our next episode coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Practice Management Advice Podcast with Kirk Stange. Kirk Stange is the president and founding partner of Stange Law Firm, a multi-state divorce and family law practice. For more insight on similar law firm management topics, visit his practice management advice blog at lawfirmpracticemanagementadvice.com.